Now a check of the weather forecast for Toronto, York, Durham, Halton Peel, and Hamilton. Sunny and continuing warm, but certainly less humid than it has been earlier in the week. A high of 25 degrees, except cooler near the lake. Tonight, cloudy conditions. There's about a 40% chance of showers, perhaps even a thunderstorm developing with a low of 17 degrees. For tomorrow, the forecast calls for mainly cloudy conditions, few more showers returning, and thunderstorms as well, with a high near 22. Downtown at 16 and sunny. You are listening to CBC Radio.
Hello, I'm Sheila Rogers. All this week, This Morning begins half an hour later so we can bring you Canada Reads, the battle over Canadian books. By one's own side, especially when it harms one's own personnel. The definition could be extended to include the personnel of your allies. It's a haunting term, friendly fire, given the long-standing friendship of our two countries. Our soldiers were killed in the line of duty, but how was it that they were in harm's way? There will be an investigation conducted on both sides to answer the question that I can't shake this morning. How could this happen? Good morning, I'm Judy Madron. This is a special edition of World Report. The deaths of 4 Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan and the wounding of 8 others has shocked and saddened the country. Officials say it happened when a U.S. aircraft accidentally bombed Canadian troops late yesterday. The news was announced last night in Ottawa.
The nature of the professions of arms is as such as it is, one in which there are inherent dangers. Those dangers are magnified by missions of this kind.
Canada's Chief of Defence Staff General Ray Hinault commenting on the bombing. In a few minutes, the Prime Minister is expected to make a statement in the House of Commons about the tragedy. We're joined now by Anthony Germain, our Parliamentary Affairs correspondent, who is in Ottawa. Anthony, can you just tell us what we know?
Well, what we know so far, Judy, is that this tragic incident happened at about 5:30 Ottawa time yesterday when an F-16 aircraft fired laser-guided bombs into a Canadian nighttime training exercise. We know that the lives of 4 Canadian soldiers were lost. We now know that they were paratroopers from the Princess Patricia's Light Infantry based in Edmonton. And the tragedy being described the way the military does as a friendly fire incident is going to be investigated. Both the Canadian and American governments have promised an investigation of this. And I can tell you that here in Parliament, on Parliament Hill, about 15 minutes ago, the Canadian flag on the Peace Tower was slowly brought down to half-mast as a sense of mourning really sinks into Parliament Hill.
Now, you mentioned that bombs had been dropped. Earlier, we'd heard 1 or 2 bombs had possibly been dropped. Has that been clarified?
Well, it's been speculated that there may have been more than 1 bomb, but as far as we actually know and what we can confirm as facts are, we know for sure that 1 was dropped. Whether there was 2, whether it hit Canadians or not, we really don't know. The fact that they were laser-guided, though, does suggest, speaking to some military officials, that there are 2 possible scenarios that are likely. One is that the pilot misidentified the target and fired upon it. The other possibility is that the pilot may have recognized another target and simply fired his weaponry at the wrong location.
Now, misidentified, we assume that there would be some communication with the ground about the firing. Is that correct?
That would depend, Judy, on whether the pilot perhaps saw some firing activity happening on the ground and felt that he was under attack. If the pilot determined that he was under attack, he could, with his own autonomy, decide to fire at the target. The other possibility is that he would have received some guidance from the ground as far as a location to hit. So the area of confusion here will be the subject of this investigation, which both governments have promised. And one area that's likely to come up is the fact that this pilot was an American Air National Guard pilot. There will be questions raised about the training level of pilots in the American National Guard, because oftentimes these are reservists who fly civilian aircraft and are called into service for various crises and military operations.
And have the victims been identified?
The information at the briefing that General Ray Hinault, the Chief of the Defence Staff, gave was that they were not going to release the identity of the Canadian soldiers to us until the families had been carefully explained to everyone. Now, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien is standing up in the House of Commons to make a statement.
Mr. Speaker, Yesterday, the House marked the celebration of the 20 years of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Last night, our nation was reminded of the precious cost that comes with the standing up for the rights and freedoms that we hold so dear.
We learned last night that a horrible accident that occurred during a live fire exercise near Kandahar, Afghanistan, had resulted in casualties among our Canadian troops. 4 of our soldiers, all of them members of Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, have been killed, and 8 others were wounded. Mr. Speaker, we still don't know all the facts, but it seems clear that the fire upon our soldiers came from a fighter aircraft belonging to our American allies. When he found out this news, President George Bush telephoned me to express his profound sadness and to offer his most sincere condolences to the families of our soldiers.
At times like these, we grasp for words of comfort and consolation, but they are just words. They can never do justice to the pain and loss that is being felt this morning in Edmonton by mothers and fathers, wives and children who have received the worst news we can imagine. All we have in our power today is to tell them, as a nation, that they are in our thoughts and prayers. The campaign against terrorism is the first great global struggle for justice of the 21st century. And as in all such conflict of the past, Canada has been on the front lines. The Canadian Armed Forces has set itself apart with their valor, daring, and skill. And if words cannot console this loss, Mr. Speaker, they also cannot fully express the pride that all Canadians have felt at the exemplary way in which they have carried their duty. We have so many questions this morning. Extensive training for combat is meant to save lives. How is this that in this awful case it took so many lives? And I want to assure the families and the people of Canada that these questions will be answered. Indeed, President Bush has pledged the full cooperation of the Americans with us in the investigation that is already underway. For this moment, Mr. Speaker, we must give over our hearts and prayers to the loved and the lost, and to the families to whom our nation owes a debt of gratitude that is beyond mortal calculation.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That's Prime Minister Jean Chrétien making a statement about this tragic event, Judy, that was announced early this morning, Ottawa time.
He said that, as in the past, Canadians have been on the front lines. Is there any precedent for this kind of death of Canadian soldiers in other situations?
Well, the military tries to make a distinction between the times Canada has lost soldiers in offensive military campaigns as opposed to the other military engagements that Canada has made around the globe. We've lost people in Bosnia and in the Balkans, but this is really the first time since Korea that we've lost people during an offensive campaign. I think that the Prime Minister, when he talks about the meaningless of words at a time like this, certainly is reaching out to try to comfort Canadians and particularly the families of the people who were killed. However, However, to talk about Canadians being on the front lines and to have Canadians killed in a training exercise near the Kandahar airport are two very, very different things. And as the investigation proceeds, there will be an accountability issue here, because this is, after all, a military error of colossal and tragic proportions, where Canadians in a designated training zone were bombed by an American plane. So without, it's going to be important to allow people time to grieve, but on the other hand, people are going to want answers to these questions, and the Prime Minister just made a commitment that those questions are going to be answered.
Anthony, if you would stand by, we're going to go to Laura Lynch in Washington and come back to you a little bit later.
Okay.
As I said, we're going now to Washington. Laura Lynch joins us. Laura, Prime Minister Chrétien said that the questions will be answered and that full cooperation has been pledged by President Bush. What is the official reaction there in the United States?
Well, there actually has not been any officially voiced reaction, no public reaction yet to this. I mean, we do know, as the Prime Minister said, that the President was in touch with the Prime Minister, expressing his condolences and offering his cooperation in the investigation. Also, we know that the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, was in touch with Minister Eggleton. The President is probably expected to make a statement about this at some point today. He has several public appearances and will probably work in an opportunity to make a statement of condolence and a promise of cooperation publicly about this. It's certainly not being ignored by American media. It has been a lead story on American newscasts this morning. The statement that the Prime Minister just made in the House of Commons was carried on news channels down here as well. So Americans are acutely aware of what this means to Canadians.
Do we know if this will be an officially joint investigation between Canada and the U.S., or will it be a Canadian investigation supported by the U.S.?
I imagine that's what they're trying to sort out right now, how exactly that cooperation will take place. But we do certainly know that is going to be some form of joint cooperation between Canadian and American armed forces, and that only makes sense considering what happened.
Thanks, Laura. Anthony, is there any sense in Canada about what kind of investigation this will be? Oh, we seem to have lost Anthony. Laura, are you still with us?
Yes, I am, Judith.
We do have a clip from the Lieutenant Colonel of the 3rd Battalion, Pat Stogren, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, a response from Canada's Army. This is Pat Stogren expressing his condolences to the families of the paratroopers who lost their lives.
On behalf of myself and all members of the 3 PPCLI Battle Group, our sincerest heartfelt condolences. Words cannot express the profound sense of loss and grief that we share with you. Paratroopers are a special breed of soldiers, and these young men were amongst the finest, bravest paratroops I have ever soldiered with. They have sacrificed their lives in the name of Canada, protecting our way of life from the scourge of terrorism. They will not be forgotten. To the families and friends of those paratroopers who were injured, we remain committed to providing our heroes the best possible support we can to get them on their way to a full and speedy recovery. We will be with you and your loved ones throughout this difficult time. In the wake of this terrible loss...
That was Canadian Lieutenant Colonel Pat Stogren speaking earlier this morning in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And that sums up our special report on the deaths of 4 Canadian soldiers and the wounding of 8 others in Afghanistan. Our thanks to Anthony Germain in Ottawa and Laura Lynch in Washington. CBC Radio will have continuing coverage of this story throughout the day. I'm Judy Madron, and we now conclude our special World Report.
Kick it off.
Yes, I would.
Gosh, I love that bell.
I
Thank
do
you.
too.
I needed that.